extended breech at mother asking for vaginal delivery?
Yeah, so if the patient meets all the criteria like no hypertension of the head, they must be allowed to deliver till there is crowning of the breech at the perineum. Till then, you should not do any maneuvers. If you have, in fact, the extended breech is a good dilator of the cervix compared to other complete breech, because it is more compact. It dilates the cervix nicely. And first thing is, once there is crowning of the frank breech at the perineum, periotomy should be done, and the delivery of the uh, breech should be allowed till umbilicus without any much manipulation. And you must have a pelvifemoral grip. You should not hold at the abdomen, otherwise it will cause visceral injuries. So pelvifemoral grip is very important, and you must see that always you have back as anterior, as I elaborated earlier. Hello? I'm not able to hear you, madam.
Sorry, sir. So the second question is that if there is a twin pregnancy with first breech and no maternal comorbidities, and the mother asks for a vaginal delivery, how do you proceed?
Definitely, it can be undertaken. If the patient, because we have seen in many times, there is so much of vaginal deliveries in medical colleges, especially twins, because most of the times the weight is less. Most of the babies weigh less than 2.5 kgs. Definitely is not a contraindication. And the twins, if you read indication for cesarean section, non-cephalic presentation of the twins is an indication for cesarean section. It does not always hold good. Even if twins with the breech presentation as a first baby can definitely be allowed for vaginal delivery if they meet the criteria of trial of labor for breech.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, because it is a relative indication for cesarean section, and many times in our medical colleges we find patients who are severely anemic, thrombocytopenia, and all other comorbidities. So doing a cesarean section in such a woman would be more hazardous, and we have actually delivered non-Catholic presentations, first presentations in a breech in a twin pregnancy, and the patients do fairly well.
Basically speaking, the obstetrics must be institutional practice.
Yes.
What happens is we don't have support of midwives in India. There are a lot of obstetricians are there. We are doing every work of so starting from seeing BP, doing para-abdominal examination, seeing FHS. What happens at the end of the day, the individual private practitioners they are all tired and exhausted, and they are not in a mood to wait too long for vaginal deliveries. This is what happens. So my teacher used to say, obstetrics must be institutional practice wherein there is rotation of duties, there is monitoring, constant monitoring. In private practice, what happens? Every responsibility lies with an obstetric practitioner, and they will err on the side of cesarean section than vaginal delivery. That's why we see a lot of deliveries, vaginal deliveries happening in institutions than in private practice, individualized practice.
Thank you very much, sir. The next speaker is ready. Thanks for
it. Sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
So may we have Dr. Purnima slide up, please? Dr. Purnima Jaydev is going to speak on the conduct of labor in COVID-19 pandemic. We welcome you, ma'am.
You can share, madam, or we should share from here. Yes, sorry.
Yes,
hello.
Visible,
yeah,
madam.
You can see, madam.
We
now
can
visible.
Make it full screen. Yes, madam.
Yes, I'm from General Hospital Jayanagar now. We are having 300 bed hospital at present, and 120 is given to the COVID. In there, we are having separate delivery section, and we are delivering only the negative patients now. All positive COVID patients will be shifted to either Victoria or other COVID dedicated hospitals. Whatever we have delivered the patient and got the results afterwards. That's why we are having delivered vaginally 3 patients are positive and LSCS 50. And after the recovery, there are 4 patients we have delivered. But most of them, as soon as we get the results, we are going to refer them to higher hospital where they are conducting COVID-19 because they'll have separate settings. I will tell you later. And we have observed oligohydramnios, thick edematous card, meconium stain, amniotic fluid in these COVID positive patients. Maybe this is of some help, but at present it is very small study. We cannot conclude anything. As the WHO tells, it is the woman's right to safe and positive childbirth, whether or not they have confirmed COVID-19 infection. So we have to give them the full safety, full positivity. Then that is, we have to have a attender with them. We have to speak with the patient properly. Nowadays, I've seen with COVID-19 patients, nobody want to go near the patient at all. And I'll tell you how it will be very easy with my talk. Educate the health staff initially. That means you have to train health staff periodically with graded stage comprehensive training. That means you have to periodically train them because every day we are getting new SOPs from the government side and we are getting a lot of studies which are telling you, you do this, you do that, like that. And we have to do the graded. That means for doctors, we have to train in a different way. For staff nurse, we have to train it in a different way. And even for Group D and our lab technicians, so many of them, we have to train in a stage, and comprehensive training is very much essential as we do it in NABH, as we do it in NQAS, that is National Quality Assurance Scheme. Then also our Lakshya program and also Kayakalpa program from the government. Infection prevention and control measures has to be taught to all healthcare providers. Donning and doffing area. This is very important and it has to be done systematically. Donning is wearing the PPEs and doffing is removing the PPEs. Appropriate use of PPEs to be taught to everybody, how to wear the mask, gown, gloves, face shield, eye protection and shoe cover, which has to come first, which has to go last. You have to teach them. And importantly, waste disposal practices to be followed stringently, and that is very much essential. We know with our wearing gowns or gloves, we are going to infect other people. So waste disposal should be properly done. And all of us are wearing this for the past 6 months. And I know how difficult it is to work with these gowns and other things on our body. What are the general principles followed in maternity unit? There are SOPs for the particular healthcare unit to be followed. Every health institution should have their own SOPs. So with that, it will become very easy that SOPs to be taught to all the healthcare workers present in their health unit. Infrastructure of the health unit to be modified according to its need. Infrastructure changing is very difficult sometimes. At least in the government sector, we are telling that in our hospital only this is done, you go to other hospital for something else. But in small institutions where small nursing homes, where they are having only one labor room, it is very difficult to manage, I know. You have to have a triage area. Triage area, whether they are positive, they are negative, you have to ask for the history to be well taken before, but now I tell you, consider everybody is having positive. Personnel to be trained continuously, that is very, very important. Availability of PPE all the time. Initial stages when COVID pandemic started, we didn't have PPE. At that time, many doctors, many healthcare workers were affected, but now PPE availability is so much. At least in my hospital, I always tell proudly that all our health personnel are very well equipped, and only I got around 30 among 300 workers positive. Then infection control practices to be followed always. Always, I am been telling in all my slides, infection control practices. Wash your hand and wipe the surfaces. Don't use extra things in your OTs or in labor room so that the virus will sit on those things. Then restrict visitors to hospital is very, very, very important. And I have seen for one delivery, there will be 10 attendants coming with the patient, and that has to be reduced. Use of the mask to be compulsory for patients and also for the attenders. And don't go out of the labor room on and off. This is for patient and also for the patient attender who is with them. And what about the antenatal care? So I have told we can restrict the number of antenatal care. We can postpone the antenatal care visits, but you cannot postpone the delivery. And ICMR tells only 4 visits at least is enough. One at 12 weeks to see the nuchal thickness, at around 20 weeks for the anomaly scan, and any problem you can terminate the pregnancy as usual, even if they are COVID positive. At around 32 weeks for ruling out diabetes, and if you want to give injection TT or any other to talk with the patient, you can call her at 32 weeks. Again at 36 weeks, you plan for the labor. You have to instruct her to get her RT-PCR 1 week prior to the EDD, so that you know that they are positive or negative. And if they come in labor pain at any time during their pregnancy, you have to do RAT. RAT is rapid antigen technique, antigen test, and it will come positive for the positive patient. And if it comes negative, it will be 50% positive again. So if you do rapid antigen test and it is negative, go for RT-PCR again. And with fever, cough, anosmia, any other symptoms, you can do RAT at any time and admit the patient and get RT-PCR as it is required. And how will you manage the COVID-19 positive patients when they are in labor? Management of labor is not altered in COVID-19 positive patients. This you have to remember. It is like normal delivery, normal patients, you have to treat them, except for person-to-person contact should be limited. That means you don't have much healthcare workers even in the labor room. Restrict the number of doctors, number of staff, and you can have only the particular doctor and staff should be attending that particular labor, and they can be given off the next day or alternative days they can work. And time in the labor to be limited. That means patients should deliver and go from the labor room as early as possible. So for that you have to give them, make them to undergo active management of labor. I'll tell later. Only one attender. If at all you are allowing any attender inside, you have to allow only one attender. That too has been tested for COVID-19 and found negative. See, in the foreign countries, Western countries, they always have their husband with them during delivery time. And for us now in Laksha program, government is telling you identify one person to be with the patient always. So we are trying to do that. I know it is very difficult to do, but we have to have an attender for all the problems, because sometimes PPH, very less healthcare workers, PPH workers, nobody is there. At least that attender will be there to call the doctors or the nurses. Preferably in room with negative pressure. You deliver the patient with negative pressure rooms, and even OTs to be negative pressure. Separate entry into isolation ward, labor ward, and separate exist. If it is available, it is well and good, so that they are not mixing with the COVID-19 with the negative patient. COVID positive will not have this one with the negative patients. And separate operation theater is need of the day, because we don't know who will be coming positive, who suspected cases will be there, so many, and they'll come in labor without any test. And I've heard patient refusing for testing. They don't want. If they test, if they tell positive, it is like one very bad moment, very sad. And they not understand it is, they think it is untouchable. If they become positive, it is untouchable. So baby corner is also to be planned. It should be at least 2 meters away from the delivery bed. We have seen delivery bed and the baby corner that this one is very nearly placed, incubator. So we should not keep it. It should be 2 meters away, and remove all the unnecessary things in the labor ward. I insist, remove all unnecessary things. Keep only whatever is needed. And when you do cesarean section, it is as for any other, and COVID-19 infection is not an indication for C-section. That you have to remember. And anesthetists should use proper infection prevention control measures. They are also very, very scared. They are more scared than the obstetricians in my hospital. And they tell without COVID test, you don't enter into the OT. That is good for everybody, even for them, even for the obstetrician, all the healthcare workers and other patients we are going to get the next on the table. Anesthetists should decide about type of anesthesia. They are preferably doing with spinal or epidural. General anesthesia is taken only when there is a need because they don't want to have aerosols when they are introducing. There are now video laryngoscope. They are using video laryngoscope, and that will be of very help. They can use video laryngoscope in this set. And how will you manage suspected cases in labor? I tell you, suspect everybody is positive now in this pandemic. We don't know who is positive, who is negative. So suspect positive, that will be better. So institute infection prevention and control measures, use PPE. Everybody should use PPE, whoever is handling the delivery cases. Transfer them to an isolation room, even if it is suspected, or they should have a separate isolation room. That is always better. Do not delay obstetric care in order to get COVID-19. Some people have seen, without test, we are not going to take. If they are in labor, and I have not heard anybody delivering on the road, as patients are dying on the road, and I didn't get anybody delivered on the road in our setup at least. Treat as confirmed 19 until the test results are available. See, you might have sent the results. Don't wait for the results. You carry on with your PPE and other whatever infection control program you are going to take. Induction of labor. What to do induction in COVID positive patients? If COVID-19 infection as such is not an indication for induce of labor, amniotomy can be done to augment the labor, and they have found out that in the amniotic fluid or in the vaginal fluid or in the breast milk, there is no virus as for now. 1 or 2 studies tell out of 100, 1 patient had in the amniotic fluid, 1 had in the breast milk, but still the studies has to be more. Amniotomy with oxytocin, misoprostol with oxytocin will reduce the time of stay in labor, and that is what we use it in active management of labor. And what will you do in the intrapartum? You can use Dopplers, you can use continuous CTGs, and encourage the patient to wear mask all the time. And healthcare workers, of course, PPE should be used, and always stand near the leg and foot end of the patient rather than the head end. And especially when they're having the second stage labored breathing, sometimes they'll remove the mask patient, or in labored breathing, there will be aerosols in the this one room. Be careful to wear PPE at that time properly. And what about transmission to child from mother? There are no studies as far as now, and only 1 or 2 studies tell that there is a vertical transmission. The baby was found one day after, within 24 hours or within 48 hours. 1 or 2 babies were found out of 100 positive, other 99 no. So as such now we can take vertical transmission is not reported. And as I told, there is no virus found in placenta, amniotic fluid and breast milk. Early cord clamping is advocated. As in this one, they were telling, active management of 3rd stage of labor, do delayed cord clamping only in the patient, babies who are compromised. You have to do early cord clamping. But in COVID positive, they are telling you do early cord clamping, thinking that there will be transmission of the virus from mother to child, so that it can be reduced if you do early cord clamping. Breastfeeding is encouraged with mother wearing the mask. Initially, they were telling you keep the baby separate, mother separate, you feed the baby with this one. But as you know, for HIV positive patient also we were doing, and we found more babies dying due to malnutrition. So diarrhea with so many problems with the bottled milk or whatever they used to feed. Even with formula milk, they had problems. So that's why now government is telling better you keep the baby rooming, skin to skin touch will be there. And always a mother should wear the mask when she's feeding the baby, and baby to be kept away from the mother 6 meters when she's not feeding. That's all. And if mother is too unwell to breastfeed, if they are in ICU, they can give express milk or donor human milk from the milk bank if it is available, or no other go, you have to go with formula. And how will you manage postpartum? Vital signs, uterine contractions, maternal mental health conditions should be monitored as you do for other patients. But here I feel you should be the maternal mental health, you have to focus, because as I told already, if they are positive means they will lose that confidence. They become depressed. I have seen many patients going for depression. So we have to encourage them that COVID positive will not do anything. They'll always tell, I'm going to die with COVID positive patient, COVID positive, I don't know. Even otherwise, normal patient coming to my room, if they are COVID positive, they tell anything happens to me, madam, like that. Nothing will happen. We have to give them moral support and attention to be paid for the prevention of PPH, thrombosis, etc. Like normal people, morbidity will be more with the diabetes, hypertension, tuberculosis. Even in pregnancy, if they're hypertensive, diabetic, having some liver problem, kidney problem, cardiac problem, they may go for serious symptoms, and they may need sometime ICU care. And the neonatologist should be informed half an hour before delivery to take appropriate measure to isolate the newborn. After 2 hours, shift the mother to isolation ward if vitals are found normal. After delivery, protection procedures should be followed, like wipe the surface instead of spraying. Preferably, ultraviolet irradiations can be used once and twice a day, and 30 minutes ventilation after irradiation. If once you do irradiation, 30 minutes ventilation you should do. Then at that time when you are doing irradiation, nobody should be there in the room. So to conclude, see, I've taken you very fast. I know I've been a little late. And as we've started in the COVID, this one pandemic, we don't know how to do. But now we know what to do, what not to do. So we can go very fast. And I always tell to all my doctors not to get panicked, because I've seen for the past 4 months, doctors are not working in the hospital. Those who are 50 plus, 55 plus, they are scared. So I'm giving them, if we don't work in the hospital, who else will work? Who else will tell the patient, you will be all right, don't worry. All health units should have facilities, infrastructure, personnel to deliver or suspected confirmed pregnant women of COVID-19, and all women have right to safe and positive childbirth experience. Principles of labor management in COVID-19 pandemic remains the same, except the facility for isolation should be there. Pregnant women do not appear to be more susceptible to the consequences of infection with COVID-19 than general population. And multidisciplinary approach involving anesthetists, neonatologists, obstetrician, and infectious disease physicians is essential. And telemedicine like this, with the patient, this on video conferences also can be set. So that has been now the trend everywhere. We always have on phone call or WhatsApp, whatever you choose, you can go. And with this, I thank once again, Madam Geeta Madam, for giving me this opportunity to be with you. And very simple topic, but it is very scary also, because I've seen COVID, they just tell, no, I don't want to touch the patient. But please don't do. If we do not see this pregnant woman, who else will do? So I think I've made it very simple as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Purnima, for an excellent and a very concise, crisp session on COVID-19. Just one comment that if you want to reduce the admission of asymptomatic COVID positive patients, like in our hospital, we have made a policy of defer the non-urgent admissions pending. We tell them to first, like post-dated patients, we on the outpatient basis, we can do an NST and an AFI. In the OPD itself, tell them to get the test and then get admitted.
Yes.
Number 2 is we can get a test rather than RT-PCR. There are other tests like TrueNat and CBNat, which have a quicker turnaround time. So they can be utilized, and we are utilizing them for getting the reports earlier.
Definitely, but don't deny in doing RT-PCR, because 50% of them will be negative. That you have to remember. So please see to that next day when you get, you have to isolate them, and whatever is given treatment you have to give. That is very important.
Madam, that is for the rapid antigen test. For the TrueNat, it has got an excellent sensitivity as well as specificity. It is like a PCR test wherein a sample is sent. So TrueNat and CBNat have got an excellent specificity and sensitivity, and it is said that we don't even need to do a repeat RT-PCR if that comes positive, although RT-PCR is a gold standard. So that is what we are doing in our institute.
But we are not having in our facilities to do that. Maybe if the facilities are not available, we will be doing like this, we tell. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Madam, just a question on the, we have the rapid antibody test. So what patient on the rapid antibody test, IgM is negative, IgG was positive.
Okay.
So now she had been infected earlier.
Yes.
And definitely we took universal precautions, delivered her, but RT-PCR was sent. And after 1 day, we got the RT-PCR as positive. So what to tell about this patient? Is she infectious to us? Because RT-PCR will be positive even for few days, even if the patient is not infecting us. Maybe
Yes.
are there.
Yeah, even dead viruses are present.
Yeah.
It will show positivity. But the most infectious period is the second week. That is, once they are infected, the second week, not the 7 days. From 7 to 14 days, they are most infective. So if after that, even if it comes positive, it is not that much to be worried. But you have to have all precaution. Better.
Yes,
Once they are positive, better you use all precautions.
Yes, ma'am.
If I can make a comment, madam, the Government of India guidelines now, they do not recommend doing a repeat testing for a patient who has been positive. They are kept for 10 days, they are kept in the facility, for 7 days home isolation, and after 17 days, they are considered non-infectious, and a repeat testing is not at all advisable.
Not at all. Yes.
Gives rise to a lot of confusion as to what is the status. So they are considered non-infectious after 17 days, and no repeat testing is advisable.
Yes.
That is better.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank the organizers for giving us an opportunity to have us here. It was an excellent session, and I hand over to Dr. Veena to conduct the later session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Swati, for chairing our sessions for a long time and giving your inputs. We thank you very much from the organizers. And thanks a lot, Dr. Purnima ma'am.
Thank you.
Practical experiences, because I had heard your talk on POXO. That's why I wanted you to give a talk on COVID, because we want the practical things to be told.
Yes,
Situation.
Thank you.
The need of the hour. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, madam.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Purnima madam. Thank you, Swati madam. Yeah. Now we start with the next session, the panel discussion.
I would like to thank our coordinators, Dr. Veena, Dr. Umashankar Borkar, and Dr. Geeta Doppa. And also thank you to our chairperson and speakers of the sessions in the morning. So good afternoon to all the delegates of the conference. You have logged into the National E-Conference on Labor and Birth organized by the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, KVG Medical College and Hospital. So moving on to the last session of this conference, the panel discussion on case scenarios. The moderator of the session will be Dr. Ravikant Jio, Organizing Secretary, Associate Professor, Pelvic Endoscopic Surgeon of Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, KVG Medical College and Hospital, Sulya. He is a very skilled laparoscopic and hysteroscopic surgeon. And the panelists of this session are Dr. Padmalata Venkataram. She's the lead consultant at Rangadore Memorial Hospital.
It's okay. I have been introduced yesterday. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I would like to introduce you today too, ma'am. She is the president of Bangalore RCOG Trust, faculty and research guide at Svyasa, past president, Bangalore Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology, national expert on diabetes and pregnancy, trustee doctor for SEVA. She has won the India Positive Award from CNN IBN for reaching out to people in 2012. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Dr. Pradeep Ganiga, currently working in AG Institute of Medical Sciences as HOD of department. He completed his MBBS, from KMC Hubli. He has done his MS OBG from Bangalore Medical College. He is a member of IAGE and member of Indian Association of Sexual Medicine Practitioner. His area of interests are male infertility, male sexual dysfunction. He has published many articles on national level. He's also a very good Yakshagana artist, the traditional culture of coastal Karnataka. The next panelist is Dr. Prasanna Kumar Shetty, Professor and Head, Shema, IVF Lab, KS Hegde. He's also President of Mangalore Obstetrics and Gynecology Society, past Secretary 2018 and 19, and formerly a lecturer at CMC Vellore.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome, sir. Our other panelist is Dr. Srimati Raman. She's a consultant obstetric and gynecologist at Rangadore Memorial Hospital, Bangalore. She has been awarded 10 gold, 13 prizes and medals during MBBS at college and university level. She has been invited as speaker, moderator, and panelist in various conferences. She's a faculty in CTG, Obstetric Emergency Training Workshops. She has publications of posters and paper publications in state, regional, national, and international conferences. And her special interests are maternal medicine, medical disorders and high-risk pregnancy, advanced labor ward management, clinical governance, guidelines and protocols, and medical education, MRCOG, and CTG. Welcome, ma'am. And our other panelist is Dr. Prakruti KP. She is a fellow in maternal fetal has done a fellowship in maternal fetal medicine from Rangadore Memorial Hospital. She has her MBBS from JJM Medical College, Davangere, her DGO from KLE Institute, Belgaum, and successfully completed her DNB from Baptist Hospital, Bangalore. Her special interests are fetal medicine, advanced labor ward practice, guidelines and protocol development, and keen on skill drills. She has special and personal interests in serving the underprivileged section of the society. Welcome to all the panelists. And now I hand over the session to our moderator, Dr. Ravikant.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, all the panelists.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is a post-lunch session, a little more drowsy, which may be. So good afternoon, everyone, once again. I am Dr. Ravikant, bringing greetings from the KVG Medical College, Sulia. Today's panelist just now our student has introduced. We have a panel of 5 members. So we have a case scenario on 5 cases from normal labor to breech vegetation, so complicated, normal to complicated like. And we have one special rapid fire like questions, like one yes or no type questions which we come across in clinical practice. One for some of the funny situations which may come across in clinical situations like Natika Chuska, which our student has suggested. Case scenario on normal labor. Normal labor is following a normal conception. So as we all know, conception is a natural phenomenon, but it should end up in a normal labor in most of the situation. But sometimes what happens, there can be abnormality which need to be detected early as possible and need to be managed. But still, most of the cases end up in normal delivery without affecting much of the difficulty to the mother or the fetus. But while preventing the complications, we may end up in increasing the number of abdominal deliveries. But to reduce as much as possible the incidence of abdominal delivery, we have two-day conference and understanding the physiology of labor and abnormalities of labor and various methods to conduct detect the early abnormal labor and manage the abnormal labor. So much of discussion has been done. So now today we shall try to apply on a real patients in our clinical practice, how this knowledge can be applied in our patients. We shall go ahead with the first case of normal labor. She is a case of primigrada with 40 weeks, 2 days gestation. She was perceiving fetal movements well, and she came for regular safe confinement. On per examination, she had occipital lateral position. And per examination, cervix was medium. That means all the Bishop score was not adequate. It was less than 7, so it's not a good Bishop score. But only pelvis was adequate for average stage baby. Pelvis was adequate. So, the impression, primigrada with 40 weeks, 2 days gestation. She was euthyroid on thyroxine, had a small 3 into 5 centimeter fibroid uterus, and she came for safe confinement without any complaints. And on admission, we did ultrasonography, which showed single live internal pregnancy of 39 weeks, 3 days with adequate Leica, and the estimated fetal weight was 3.9 kg. And our NST was reactive. So this is the situation of this patient. So just to avoid confusion, I'll just take the name of each panelist so that just to avoid confusion while answering the question, with your kind permission. Dr. Latha Madam, should we wait for spontaneous onset of labor or go for induction of labor?
Yeah, she is post-dated and she has come in with some niggles, and I think you can go in for induction. Cervix is fairly favorable. So I don't think you will be unnecessarily landing her up in section. So you can go in for induction.
Okay. So, Dr. Pradeep, so what is the preferred method of induction in this patient?
First of all, it's when we read theoretically about post-dated pregnancy or past dates, whatever. So always the one thing what we makes to think twice, postponing the induction or waiting for normal labor. I mean normal labor, normal and spontaneous onset of labor. There's something called unexplained meconium staining of the Leica. Okay, that's the incidence is given. It increases after the whatever we call 40 weeks of pregnancy, significantly increases. So this is the one concern, because for clinically she may be looking everything all right, but there is one entity called unexplained meconium stained Leica. So it may cause further problem to the fetus if you postpone the delivery. Second thing, there is no clear-cut guidelines about, as per the our country is concerned, when exactly we have to induce the labor in such a scenario. It is the clinical decision left to the individual patient and to the individual clinician. But as per overall consensus among the treating doctor is not to wait more than 2 days, 3 days after the expected date of delivery. Thinking in terms of there could be a possibility of meconium stained Leica. Because of exact reason we don't know, there may be all the factor evaluation may be normal, still it is you have to keep in the mind. So as a clinician, I prefer to induce when she crosses 40 weeks 2 days. That's my opinion.
Okay. Okay. What is the preferred method of induction according to you?
Pardon?
Sorry, can I just add on, please,
Yes,
if you don't mind?
Yes,
Meconium staining of labor could be physiological. As the gestational age progresses, I think at term, from 37 weeks onwards, I think we're 7% at 37 weeks to nearly 15%, 11 to 15% at dates is what usually is seen. Meconium staining of the Leica can happen as a sign of maturity of the fetus. It need not be pathological. So we don't have to get unnecessarily alarmed about it, is what I wanted to say. And for each week of gestation, post-dated especially, it can increase up to 25% by 42 weeks of gestation. So one has to carefully monitor the labor with fetus rather with CTG if there is meconium stain liquor. And if the lady is not very keen on induction, I would have given her some more time, probably waited up to a week after the dates. There is, I mean, well, Indian data is actually lacking at 41 weeks. Yeah, people prefer to sort of deliver the women a bit early in India. There is only one paper to say that Indian babies mature early, and by 40 weeks, probably it would be like 41 weeks. That's so probably there's nothing wrong in inducing this lady, because she is 40 plus 2 weeks, she has come to you. And if she is willing to be induced, fairly okay, bishops, 4 is not too bad.
But some in WHO recommends routine induction 39 weeks, which gives them more chances of normal delivery. Or
No. Sorry. Yeah. Srimati, you want to say something?
No, ma'am. ARRIVE trial does come out with a recommendation that we can induce women at 39 weeks, even if it's a low risk primary section rates being very, very less. So I don't think we can extrapolate to our population and start inducing women at 39 weeks on a routine basis. If she's a high risk pregnancy for various reasons, then you might want to consider at a routine low risk primary gravid. I don't think inducing routinely at 39 weeks would be a good idea with the limited evidence which we have got from ARRIVE trial. And of course, maturity of the baby keeps going. The CNS maturity keeps happening till about 39 and 40 weeks. So we wouldn't want to be doing long-term neurodevelopmental problems for the offspring by inducing them at 39 weeks.
Okay. Also, the pregnancies might not be dated properly, so we might be delivering them prematurely. Also, early terms have more morbidity neonatal-wise and also long-term development-wise. So we have to be sure that we have crossed 39 weeks, which might be difficult in India, and there might be a lot more sections also.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as the method of induction is concerned, the specific
yes, sir.
that Dr. Ravi has asked.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Now,
yes,
there is no hard and fast rule which method of induction we need to employ, say PG2 or PG1 or whatever the clinical circumstances dictate, and whatever the obstetrician is more comfortable with and familiar with, that I would say is the more preferred method of induction. And as far as the time of delivery is concerned, I agree with the Dr. Srimati Raman that ARRIVE trial has indicated that routine induction at a strategy of inducing everyone at 39 plus weeks can reduce the incidence of past dates and attendant complications. But in Indian scenario, once the patient reaches 40 weeks or EDD, psychologically, we tend to be, back when I was working in Vellore, the inductions were closer to 41 weeks. And when I came out of there, it was always closer to 40 weeks or 40 plus 1, 2, people start hyperventilating. And then as far as method of induction, as many obstetricians, as many methods, particularly it is prominent in teaching hospitals. You go to one unit, it will be one preferred method, and another unit, it will be, the preferred method. So it is really your comfort with the your comfort levels with the method of induction. And
don't we think that we should be having uniform protocols in the hospitals that we work? I think it's important so that people speak the same language.
Agreement.
Yes, it should be individualized in an institutional protocol. Should be followed.
Yes.
Thank you. We induced her with the 50 microgram of misoprostol vaginally.
My only comment there would be probably chance of hyperstimulation would be more with 50 micrograms. We need closer monitoring. 25 micrograms appears to be safer, and also oral misoprostol appears to be more effective.
Okay, point taken, madam. So how many doses can be repeated, madam? How many doses? Like in the textbook they mentioned up to 6 doses also can be, but in practical?
Up to 5 actually. Some books say you can go up to 5. You can repeat 3 to 6 hourly actually, according to the level of uterine contractions. Sorry, the question was for ma'am. Sorry.
For me, yeah, okay. For me, yeah, yes, we do give them, as he said, 5 doses per day. That would probably take them up to 10 hours, because we give them every 2 hours 25 micrograms of oral misoprostol. We rest them overnight and might repeat the same thing the next day also. Yeah, I don't want to sort of talk about, I mean, well, if she did not respond on day 1, what we are going to do, maybe we will have a question later, or do you want me to continue?
Yes, we have a questions later.
Okay.
So she was monitored regularly for her vitals, uterine contraction, fetal heart rate. What is the preferred method, madam? Whether continuous electronic monitoring should be kept or intermittent oscillation is okay?
Well, you are talking about induction, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, madam.
Intermittent auscultation, if she's a low risk woman without any fetal compromise, and if the traces have been satisfactory post misoprostol, I think intermittent auscultation would be fine. But for our own evidence, I think it is important that we have a trace probably an hour after misoprostol. I mean, whether it is vaginal or oral, I think it is important to document a normal trace. And even prior to induction, it is important to document a normal trace. Later on, it can be intermittent auscultation. If there are problems with auscultation, then you can do intermittent tracing. But in our practice, truly in our practice, we do tracings on and off at least every 4 hours. The woman would have had some form of tracing just to reassure ourselves. Sometimes you can't rely on the staff completely. That is another problem. Yeah.
Dr. Pradeep, what is your take?
Yeah, first it's very well understood that all low-risk pregnancies, continuous monitoring has no additional benefit. That's a take-home message known to everyone. Yeah. But my question is, should we put this post-dated pregnancy will put under a high risk or low risk? Again, the one more entity comes. I think if you individualize, depending on your resource availability and other things, you can put it's not a mandatory to monitor with a continuous electronic monitoring. I think intermittent auscultation will hold good.
Okay. So if the facility is available, initially 1 hour of induction, continuous monitoring, and afterwards you can go for auscultation.
That is probably not continuous, 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay, madam. Okay.
Trace. So I would say intermittent electronic monitoring. Rather than intermittent electronic monitoring.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in our for this patient, though we have the facility for continuous electronic monitoring, but for this patient we did the intermittent auscultation.
Sure.
After 4 hours, she had only 2 contractions lasting 20 to 30 seconds, and the patient didn't improve much. From 5, it became 6. That's all. So we repeated misoprostol 50 microgram vaginally once again after 4 hours. So after induction of labor with misoprostol, how long can we wait to call it as a failure of induction, madam? Srimati, madam?
See, basically, for the induction of labor, the definitions are very varied. Each society has come up with varied definitions, but whatever ACOG says is you complete a course of cervical ripening, which means that as we discussed, if it's going to be oral or vaginal misoprostol, at least give them 5 to 6 doses. And after a course of cervical ripening, then you would see if you can rupture the membranes if it's favorable. If not, maybe you can continue with cervical ripening, or if not, if you're going to give oxytocin, at least 24 hours of oxytocin And if you have failed to get them into established labor or not having regular contractions, that is when you should actually diagnose as failed induction. So if you look at the definition, it is actually a pretty long period. So you might argue 24 hours of oxytocin induction is not practically feasible in a normal day-to-day setting. So that is why I think it's important to consider a repeat course of a different cervical ripening. If you have given misoprostol, then maybe you would want to consider a PG, sort of PGE2, or maybe a mechanical induction, and give her a proper cervical ripening, provided the maternal and fetal conditions are satisfactory, and then consider rupturing the membranes and starting oxytocin. But be very careful before you deem this patient as a failed induction before giving her a proper cervical ripening and a proper induction.
Dr. Prasanna sir, what is your take, sir?
Yeah, like ma'am said, this kind of look at Arul Kumar's mechanism of labor, then the definition is quite different. And the recent studies, they are much shorter. What they say is one cycle of induction. And also we must remember that the lines between cervical ripening and actual process of induction are being blurred, because some people go into labor with your misoprostol or Cerviprime. And some books say that, with good uterine contractions and she has not, the cervical dilatation is not gone into active labor. So these kind of things are also qualify as induction of labor. And my take is, if the indication is not urgent, then you can, if it is urgent, you can repeat maybe PGE2 after 6 hours, or 3 to 4 doses of PGE1. If the indication is not very urgent, you can counsel the patient and give a break and repeat your this thing. Because as long as the membranes are not ruptured, there is no point of no return. So you can always, the patient can sleep on it and decide the next morning whether patient and doctor both can sleep on it and decide the next morning. Yeah.
Yeah, if she hadn't responded, probably we can even review the indication for induction and then probably
go back to the dates.
Bring her back. Yeah, because in this case, there is no hurry actually. If she hadn't responded, I don't want to put her unnecessarily under the knife. So,
like 24 hours
indication, induction should be considered in all seriousness as an intervention.
Yeah.
And what our residents and we fail to remember is that at the start of the process of induction, we must take the consent for both intrapartum cesarean section as well as whatever the intervention. So it should be taken with utmost seriousness that it is an intervention and the attendant complications.
Proper counseling of the patient before induction is very, very important, telling them that it can be a long drawn process, and they may have to be patiently waiting if you want to give her a proper induction process. Because just though NICE guidelines also say 1 course of cervical ripening and then you can call it as a failed induction, but I think we wouldn't be doing justice to the patient by just giving her 1 course and then if everything is satisfactory, calling it a day and doing a section. So it's important that we counsel them and be patient, provided of course maternal and fetal conditions are satisfactory.
Yes, madam. Like normal labor patient or maternal condition, fetal condition is normal. So how many doses we can wait that to tell that she's not going to respond to
1 course of cervical ripening. So if you're going to give vaginal misoprostol, maybe you'll be repeating at least 5 doses. And after that, the only problem is we tend to give oral misoprostol, so it becomes very short. Whereas if you're going to give vaginal misoprostol, the recommendation by WHO is 25 micrograms 6 hourly. So if you're going to give 4 or 5 doses, then that is going to be itself a long drawn process. So we generally give 25 micrograms 2 hourly, finish a course, and if nothing has happened, you rest her, and then again repeat it with another cervical ripening agent. Either we go for, sometimes if it's very favorable, then we might even go for a repeat misoprostol, or if not, we look at whether we need to do a mechanical dilatation, because it's always better to use an alternative cervical ripening agent so as to mix and match and make sure the uterus responds better.
Okay. Dr. Prakriti?
Sir.
Yeah, this initial observation of continuous or intermittent monitoring with NST, are there any finding favors that we should stop monitoring like? continuing the induction of labor.
So I'm unable to hear clearly.
Yeah. Suppose if we are doing a continuous electronic monitoring for this patient,
Okay.
like after 1 hour, 2 hours, if any NST findings that may tell that we should not go further, in a only electronic monitoring findings goes against the continuation of induction of labor.
Okay, only if there is a pathological CTG. If suppose there are persistent variable deceleration which are deteriorating and with poor variability, any such things which of pathological findings, we think of it's better go for a abdominal delivery. If in case it is suspicious, still we resuscitate mother by giving fluids, left lateral position, wait for it to improvement. And in case if there is no improvement and deterioration, then we think about no point going ahead.
But many a time we'll see variable decelerations most of the time in first stage of labor. So,
Yeah, recurrent variable deceleration with atypical features like, as I said, poor variability or loss of shouldering or W wave pattern. These are all the atypical features. If such things are seen for the next 30 minutes, then we consider it as pathological. Otherwise, we can continue resuscitation, give her fluids, and watch for further few
means 1 or
hours.
2 episodes of bradycardia, tachycardia is not an indication for abdominal delivery.
No. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If you are really worried about the trace, probably you would ARM her, and if possible, and see what's the color of liquor. And then meconium, if there is meconium, it becomes significant. So,
one point I wanted to add is if the mother is hyperstimulating and if you are worried about the CTG,
absolutely,
please do not ARM, because people tend to start doing ARM because they're worried about the CTG. She's already hyperstimulating, and then we go and do an ARM, then we are going to further increase the strength and the number of contractions. So when she's hyperstimulating and we have worries about the CTG, then the ARM is not recommended. You would rather
That's right.
prophylaxis and resuscitate. But if not, yes, ARM is definitely helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
And also, if there is hyperstimulation, especially when you're using 50 micrograms of misoprostol, if there is hyperstimulation, then I would give her terbutaline also to settle down the contractions and see whether the trace improves. That is part of resuscitation.
9.5 hours, she still had only 2 contractions for 30 seconds, and fetal head also not descended. Bishop score also not much improved. So for this client, so should we change the preparation? Now we had used misoprostol, should we change the other preparations? Can we go like that, madam?
Yeah, I mean, 9.5 hours from when? That is insertion of the first misoprostol.
First misoprostol.
I think you can still continue with misoprostol.
Misoprostol.
You don't have to really particularly change.
No point in
changing the preparation. There's no harm. Yeah, and if the lady is objecting to vaginal misoprostol, probably you could change it to oral misoprostol. That is one of the things. I don't think I will change the induction agent at the moment.
Dr. Pradeep, what is your take on it?
Yeah, that's what we also do. Same thing. Once we adopted one method, I think we will continue. The augmentation will be done, but the changing again to another method is not
stick to same kind of preparation.
Yeah, sure.
You should stick to the same kind of preparation.
Yeah, same protocol and continue as per the required doses. Then you reassess. That's the thing, what we do.
Okay.
Because jumping over to one more method is not, I think it ultimately it makes more confusion. Doesn't serve the purpose. Before that, I think when you selecting the method only, I think you could have selected something else rather than misoprostol.
So did you select some other induction method for this patient?
PG gel would have been the better. That's what my feeling actually.
Okay.
Especially in
why do you think like that?
Thought about Propes more than gel. We prefer Propes if you think the
Propes
is very unfavorable. Then we give them a vaginal prostaglandin. We give PGE2 pessary 10 milligram. So that stays in for 24 hours, and it has got a better effect in terms of cervical ripening, and obviously you do not have to do repeated examinations like you have done in this case. So if you think the bishop is really unfavorable, you think that she might need multiple doses, maybe you can consider even giving her a vaginal insertion.
Okay.
One more thing I take into consideration clinical practice, the liquor. Whenever the liquor is a good amount of liquor, yeah, my preference is always like misoprostol is not a problem. But when the liquor is borderline, especially that happens in a post-dated pregnancy, I feel the PGU2 is a better option than the PGE1, according to the liquor estimation and all.
Okay.
Would agree with you, Dr. Pradeep. And also probably, Foley's induction probably would be better. If you are really worried, for example, IUGR or severe oligoamnias, if you're worried about the contractions and the monitoring, how much you can depend on the staff, etc., I think mechanical dilatation of the cervix is a better option.
Yeah,
Does it
actually,
increase chances of
quite underrated. If you put Foley's, another good thing about Foley's is once it dilates, there is no waiting period. You can actually start oxygen.
That's right. Yeah.
This is also one of the advantages.
Yeah.
And we combine Foley with
fallen out of favor these days.
also, sir. We combine Foley with misoprostol also. So that also seems to have a better effect. So when we put the Foley, same time give them pharmacological, sort of reduction. So combination of both. So Foley's and miso seems to be working very well for us.
Yeah, but not in case of oligoamnias. Yeah.
So not in case of oligohydramnios.
Yeah.
My only thing is the dosage of, like ma'am said, instead of 50, I think 25 micrograms, not about the method actually.
Okay. Vaginally, 25 would have used this.
Vaginally, every 2 hours, it's very difficult for the patient to submit.
Madam prefers every 2 hours, 25 orally.
Orally.
25 orally, and
there is evidence for that.
25 6 hourly.
Okay. What about the Foley's method of induction? Does it increase chances of cervical incompetence in future pregnancy, madam?
No.
Well, we haven't come across any studies, but neither have we done any studies. But it doesn't. I mean, it's a very gentle dilatation of the cervix.
Because
So
suddenly over 4 hours, 5 hours, it dilates up to 4 centimeter.
right, that's right. Yeah, that is what happens in labor also.
It is mechanical dilatation.
Yeah, it is. But we haven't come across any studies. Neither have we done any study, to be very honest with you. But I don't think it's a very gentle, very interesting question, but it's a very gentle dilatation. It's not like 18 Hagar, 20 Hagars being passed one after the other, breaking the cervical, collagen and elastin.
After 11.5 hours, patient had 3 contractions for 40 minutes. She's going into labor, but still parabdominal head is just 3/5 palpable. Cervix, only the length of cervix has decreased. Otherwise, same rest of the findings of the Bishop's Corax. Should we use prophylactic antibiotics routinely, madam?
We don't use prophylactic antibiotics routinely. There is no evidence for that also.
Okay. Dr. Ravi, before I go to that, the fundamental question here is 11.5 hours from what actually?
Sir, from the time of induction, sir. First
Meaning
dose
the
of,
time you put the misoprostol?
Yes, sir. First misoprostol. She was not in labor.
Grows with, because the clock starts ticking from, as far as my personal opinion, the good or the time when she actually goes into labor. So otherwise, what happens is most of the times the patient is inside your labor room with the cerviprime or misoprostol, and people prefer to keep her inside, and the relatives think that, oh, my daughter or daughter-in-law is inside for so long, and they will also start counting from that time. So we should have a clear distinction between that first dose and if you have taken a post cerviprime or misoprostol trace and the uterus is quiet, we can actually send her to the pre-labor.
Okay. She should not be in first stage of labor.
Particular time I have this thing with. So that we should guard against, because patients relatives start counting from that time.
Definitely patient's apprehension and relatives apprehension will be there. once taken into labor room?
I think we should keep them in the room along with the relatives. Okay. That's what we do. And they require less analgesia. They make less fuss and they wait longer.
Okay, so madam doesn't prefer any antibiotic. So 3 questions were, we give routinely when the patient a second dose of prostaglandin is given, we usually give ampicillin 2 gram for first dose and then 1 gram 6th hourly.
Do you feel, did you, in your practice, did you have any studies or did you feel that the chances of infection are more if we did not give antibiotics?
We found like that, madam. When we were giving only around the time of episiotomy or around immediately after the delivery of the patient, we used to give antibiotic. We are finding more incidence of episiotomy site infection. So when we and even lower abdominal pain, not pupil sepsis we can call, but pupil fever we could have called. Such patients were increased. When we started antibiotic, then significantly reduction was there.
I agree with madam that antibiotics are totally not justified for low risk.
Because we are doing a PV examination, so that's why we thought.
Okay.
I think we can leave it to the institution protocol. I think always we discuss antibiotic use and misuse. I think institution protocol, we have to stick to that according to your department guidelines. Madam is also, I agree, it's not an indicated, but if your institution protocol does like, you can go ahead, nothing wrong in that.
Even in some protocols in Western countries, they are very particular about antibiotics. In India, we are lax. But PROM, even term PROM people do not advise antibiotics.
Unless infection is there.
Because
hospital protocols are important, but I think you need to be making sure that, it is indicated because, unnecessarily the mother to antibiotics may give rise to antibiotic resistance in the mother and the offspring. So I think we need to be a bit careful when we are drafting protocols.
And also high doses of antibiotics given every 6th hourly, there can be there will be transplacental transfer, and it does affect gut microbiome of the fetus, which is getting programmed actively when the lady is getting into labor or through the labor.
Ampicillin mainly directed towards the GBS, Group B streptococcal infection.
Group B, we don't find it very much in our country.
One of my postgraduates did a study. We hardly found anything here.
Okay. Point taken.
Handled outside cases really, refer to you after a long time in labor, etc. Then you can start an antibiotic. I mean, empirically, repeated examinations, etc. Yeah. Otherwise, in your own booked case, the patient probably not required.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So, does ambulation in the first stage of labor will improve the progress of labor?
Yes. Upright position, ambulation, some of the, what can I say, postures, all these help.
So should we go for ARM now, madam, because edit 3/5 palpable, it is not yet engaged because around 11.5 hours over. Should we go for ARM or still we can wait for some more time?
No hurry. No hurry for ARM.
Okay. Thank you.
That's all I would say.
So after 13.
I mean, if you really had to do ARM, even if the head is not engaged, you can. But there is no hurry for it here.
Okay, ma'am.
You can just leave them alone.
Because once we break the membranes, as Dr. Prasanna sir was saying, the clock starts ticking. You're worried about infection, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
and also, you're bound to put her on oxytocin and you will tie her down to the bed.
Yes.
So you get distressed, she gets distressed, all of us get distressed.
Absolutely.
So we call the anesthetist and cause the ultimate distress of section.
Okay. So after 13.5 hours, she had a good uterine contractions. And even FHR also started moving towards the midline, and Bishop score also improved. So now uterus cervix was 4 cm dilated. We did ARM under aseptic precaution.
Yeah.
So can we anticipate fetal distress due to prolonged labor? Though the maternal condition and fetal condition was normal, did you anticipate a fetal distress even though maternal vitals and fetal FHR are normal?
So I'm not sure whether you should label this as prolonged labor.
Prolonged labor.
It is only induction. She's not yet gone into labor at all. So, I don't think we should even label it as prolonged labor. Obviously, if the labor is prolonged, then there is always a worry, how long the membranes have been ruptured, how many examinations have been done, whether she's going to get infection. If that is the case, then there is going to be some concerns on the fetus. But otherwise, this is not even prolonged labor is what I would say.
Actually, she has progressed quite well.
Dr. Prakriti, what is your take on?
Prolonged labor itself will not cause any fetal heart rate variation. Maybe if there is, because of prolonged labor, if there is any chorioamnitis or anything, that can show up the changes in the CTG, and that can result in the
distress. Uterine contractions are there for a long time. That uterine contractions are there for 7 hours, 8 hours.
That's okay, but she has been well hydrated, and maternal and fetal parameters are normal. We can continue with the labor.
Okay.
And she has just been ARM'd with no problems.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if labor analgesia is used, so does it prolong the active phase of labor? That is like many people don't accept for labor analgesia just because they think that labor will be prolonged.
No, there is no evidence for that. In the latent and active phase of labor, there is no evidence that it will prolong the duration of labor.
Correct. The evidence is that epidural, especially the low dose, doesn't prolong the active stage of labor. But if you look at the contemporary labor curves, there is a slight change, both in numbers as well as in multiple. There's a slight shift when epidural has been used, but it's a very slight shift. So for that reason, I don't think we should be worried and not give them epidural. But that is something which you would need to keep in mind. But generally, evidence is that epidural should not, in a great way, affect the labor progress.
Second stage,
especially
yes.
the first stage of labor.
So no, sir. If you look at the contemporary labor curve, if you look at how the curve starts, even from the first stage, there is a slight shift towards the right, both in the null depth and in the mul depth when they have had epidural, but it is a very marginal shift.
Dr.
But
Pradeep,
second stage, definitely, sir. The second stage, definitely, there is a marked difference.
I don't, there's no changes. I don't think there's any changes in the duration of, progression duration.
Okay, thank you. So after 15 hours, now she has strong uterine contractions and she has entered into second stage of labor. So when should we give position for the conduct of labor in second stage of labor?
Just because she is fully dilated, we should not ask her to push. That's what I emphasized yesterday. We should give her some passive second stage. If she doesn't have expulsive, forces, rather, if she is not having expulsive contractions which are making her strain, then I think we should just wait for it to descend. It is 0 is palpable, vertex at +1. There's no hurry. And CTG, if it is normal, I don't think there is any hurry. So please don't position her in lithotomy just because she is fully dilated. Ask her to get pushing, and then she gets tired, you get tired, and she lands up in instrumental delivery. So I think passive second stage is very, very important if the lady is comfortable. So let it descend, and let her use minimal efforts to push. So you will have a successful vaginal delivery, spontaneous vaginal delivery.
Means what position, when we give position, madam, what is the station you should be at least? Or...
Well, if she has, if she is whichever position she is comfortable in, you can.
No. When we should give conduct of labor position, like what stage she should progress? In second stage of labor also, she should be given when she reaches
active pushing. You don't have to put her in lithotomy. You need not put her in lithotomy at all. Actually, you can just leave her on the bed. She can keep pushing, and yeah, she can flex her legs and push, or she can squat and push, whatever. Yeah, until you are ready to deliver her. So delivery position can be different, but active pushing can be in many different ways, or lateral position and pushing. So many ways of pushing.
Prasanna sir?
Yeah, I would agree with ma'am, because maternal pushing actually contributes to very little of the force required for the second stage, because many uninformed if you have to educate our sisters to stop urging mothers to do this horrible thing right from the time like the rectum is dilated, and it is not actually required. So position wise, we've just had in the morning a session about entire positions of labor, because it doesn't really matter. But only problem is monitoring the fetal heart and looking for. So the most common is by convention in our country, we have been used to the dorsal position. When the head is seen on the perineum and it is not going back, probably I would make a
She was ambulating all the way through first.
I would keep my set ready, everything, my. I would, when it is not
think
going
so.
back, or
Yes, she was ambulating throughout the first stage of labor. So when should we tell that we can take her for conduct of labor? Like what the station should be?
She can continue.
she will guide you. She will tell you.
Yeah.
I'm not going around anymore. She will go back to the bed, and she thinks that. Yeah, that's the thing.
And she says that something is coming out, and I really have great urge to push. And then you can put her on the bed and see whether the head is visible actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so when the head is visible, we can give the position.
Yes.
Actually,
why not?
shortly position is only needed if you have to really operate.
One thing, this is all depends on the which setup you are in a medical college setup, especially in a government hospital. So we and Prasanna did from Bangalore Medical College in Vanivilas Hospital. I think you have to, otherwise delivery is guaranteed in that. So we have to tell them this is the time you have to shift, confined to your bed, don't move around, and make her to deliver in a delivery room. Other than delivery will happen in some other places. I think it depends on the setup.
I would
agree with that. Yes.
Otherwise, delivery will happen in the toilet.
Yeah, sure. So that is, I think, as an institution, we are both of you are working in an institution. I think we have to have certain guidelines when she confined to the bed. In a nursing home or in a private corporate hospital, that may differ. But in a medical college, when many women are delivering at the same time, I think we should make them to confine to bed for better. I mean, both for the clinician and for the patient.
Okay.
Yeah, depends on the setup. I don't dispute that. But ideally, that is the most convenient, comfortable for the lady to be walking around, doing whatever she wants to. And then, lie down whenever she is just about to deliver. That would be very kind to her. That's what I would
What's
say.
the prepared position, madam, to conduct the labor?
I think again it depends upon, as Dr. Pradeep and Prasanna have been saying, it depends upon your institutional preferences. But generally, we seem to be delivering all of them in lithotomy position. But if you look at midwives delivering, they deliver them in various positions. They deliver them in all fours. They deliver them in the niches position, squatting. So I think it depends upon what you are comfortable with. See, if I'm not comfortable with a lady delivering in squatting position, and I'm going to encourage her to squat and deliver, then I'm going to run into problems. So I think it depends upon what position you are generally comfortable with, and I think you should follow that.
Thank you. So client was given a proper position with lithotomy when the 3 to 4 centimeter of fetal head was visible without separating the labia. Now, how long can we wait in the second stage of labor to deliver, madam?
So you actually did that, what I was saying. Okay.
Yes, sir. How long we can say
second stage of labor with the stable, sorry?
Vital, sir. Like,
okay.
Metal findings are fine, normal, fetal heart rate also normal.
From epidural and the primi, the timings are quite flexible now.
Yeah.
Hours, and now with everything going right, you need not be so rigid about it.
At least 2 hours of active pushing in a nullib, in a prime. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
because
mean, we don't have to say that she is getting tired. We should know how to make her relax in between the contractions, keep her hydrated, etc., etc. And we should have a high threshold for instrumental delivery and section, and I think many things will be sorted out.
So just because arbitrary time limit of 2 hours over, so no need to worry.
No need to worry. It depends. Every case has to be individualized, you know. So no need to worry. There is nothing to say. It's like we have to just go and deliver her if everything is all right. And there is descent. There should be descent with active pushing, progressive descent. Otherwise, there's no point. If there is,
yeah, Dr. Prakruti. So when the patient is second stage of labor, strong uterine contractions are there. So just because fetal heart rate is normal, can you assure that fetal condition is normal?
Yeah, definitely, sir. Yeah, we can wait as all
because many times it happens that after the delivery, baby will be admitted in ICU.
No.
There are some studies which have shown a very long duration of second stage of labor can be associated with some worse maternal and perinatal outcomes, say if they've had more than 4 hours of second stage. So, but obviously we will be monitoring the mother and the fetus, and then we would be deciding when to be intervening. But we don't want to be leaving. See, how long is too long? This is what ma'am was giving in a talk yesterday. So we still don't know, but whatever evidences studies have been done have shown that beyond 4 to 5 hours of second stage, there can be slightly increased complications in the mother and the baby. So we need to be very careful. But at the same time, not denying the adequate hours in second stage is going to be also riskier for the mother and the baby.
On an average, how much time?
If there is, adding on a point, if there has been descent plus 1 centimeter, she is already at +1. So 1 centimeter at least per hour. She should be delivering by 3 hours. So if she is not delivering, then you want to think why. See, we usually in our practice, what we do is at the end of 1 hour of active pushing, we assess the lady and see what's happening. Very important to see what's happening. Even if the fetal condition, I mean, CTG is absolutely fine. Because you want to prepare for where you want to deliver, how you want to deliver, etc., etc. And you want to keep your anesthetic and pediatric colleagues alerted. So I think it's important that we give them adequate time, but not too long. Even if beyond 3 hours, the chances of normal delivery, I mean, vaginal delivery also comes down according to some studies.
I was going to tell you that this was the most exciting part of the labor, actually.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This is where if the time limit crosses, say, 1.5 to 2 hours, your antennas should be on the alert.
Yeah.
So that is what ma'am meant.
Yes,
so
sir.
we should be, like she said, we should make all preparations, reassess the pelvis, outlet, and other things, rotation, etc., etc. I mean, all the works. So contractions, etc., etc. And in the unforeseen event of having a second stage cesarean, make all adequate preparations for it. So being prepared, you should be on the alert. This is the most difficult and edgy part of labor, I would say.
The climax of labor.
Yes, yes, madam. On an average, how much time do you think that they will deliver? Like, not talking about any abnormal, average baby, average size.
Not about the time only. It is, I mean, everything you take it holistically. Like, what is the situation? What is going on? Like ma'am said, what are the deceleration? How is the liker? And how is the mother, etc., etc. So it's not just the time.
Okay, thank you. So suppose if there is incomplete rotation is there, so you try to
manual rotation of the presenting part. Yeah, I'm very, very fond of manual rotation because it allows descent also. If there is not much of a descent, if I feel that it is an arrest situation, I just manually rotate. Okay, digitally rotate, I would say most of the time, and it tends to come down. Yeah, if you rotated it into AP, when it has crossed the spines, yeah, the sagittal suture to AP, then it descends. Whether it is OA or OP, it tends to descend.
But one thing I want to tell here, see, we have adopting the whatever guidelines about antibiotics or waiting period and all, actually time duration and all. But if you go to the postnatal ward, a significant number of babies will be receiving injectable antibiotics, that is for 7 days, 14 days and all. Then how we will justify? Because whenever we question the pediatrician, the straight away tell, means not on the record, they tell is because of the prolonged labor might have happened. This answer usually comes. I feel always saddened because the baby's mother will be there in this COVID crisis. I was ready to discharge on 2nd day, but that sister will tell no, the antibiotics they have planned for 10 days, 12 days, injectable antibiotics. So how have you to, justify this situation? Because avoiding the antibiotics, allowing her to the enough time thinking that everything is all right, but making the baby to receive antibiotics for quite a long time, staying in the hospital, all those things, how you will justify as obstetrician?
I think you have to have a very strict word with your pediatric and neonatal colleagues, yeah, and have again a combined protocol, mutually agreed upon protocol, because it is important, as you very rightly said, we feel churned to see these babies because we hesitate to give one dose of antibiotics prior to delivery. And we see them receiving multiple doses of antibiotics, which really upsets us. So I think at the drop of the hat, antibiotics should not be administered to the neonates. Just because it's a prolonged rupture of membranes, I don't think, or pre-labor rupture of membranes, etc. I don't think they should be administering antibiotics. There should be strict criteria for administering antibiotics. So
maybe
that's
this is
what
a time where we should have integrated
we
teaching.
have to insist upon. Yeah, and also that is where the perinatal meetings go a long way in discussing the protocols and also exchanging our views and deciding on uniformity.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So is rimming of perineum is useful during 2nd stage of labor?
Rimming, I think you mean by stretching the perineum.
Yeah, stretching the perineum. Routinely they do it.
See, what evidence and whatever studies have been shown have shown that if you want, you can do massage of the perineum. That can, to a certain extent, help to decrease the perineal test. But as such, stretching can be very painful. May not have a very remarkable effect in whatever you're trying to do. So I am not too sure that rimming is going to be a very useful technique.
And also it can sometimes become quite edematous also, or quite friable also with rimming. And you can have the oozing from the perineum, which can be difficult to sort of suture. So I'm not for rimming.
So in the second, Dr. Prakriti?
Sir.
If there is a bradycardia seen in the 2nd stage of labor. So is that an indication that fetus is in the harmful condition?
Some kind of variable or early decelerations are common in 2nd stage because of the head compression, prolonged pushing, and some loss of contacts when she's pushing in the CTG. But bradycardia, definitely we should be careful if it's more than 3 minutes. And if we are able to deliver the fetus at that moment, we have to go it.
One word of caution, sometimes you might be picking up maternal heartbeat. Yeah, because we have to be sure that it is fetal. And if there is significant bradycardia, it is better to get on and deliver.
Yes, yeah.
So what is the role of scalp page tester or even a transcervical intraarterial pressure catheter?
Scalp pH testing is sort of very much propagated in UK. Even US do not do much of a scalp pH testing. I mean, we have done it whenever we have doubts about the CTG, when there's an abnormal CTG, and especially if she's not in a deliverable condition, we do scalp pH testing. But doing it in second stage has got its problems. So we would rather be very careful if you're going to do it in second stage. But unfortunately, scalp pH testing in India, in Indian setting, we have not been able to do it much because of the, sort of the capillary tube adaptation and all, which we need to be doing. But even in UK, there is lots of controversy. We be continuing with scalp pH testing. Can we move on to something better? So that is when the ST analysis came into play. So scalp pH testing has a very limited role in women who have had abnormal CTG, wherein you are in a dilemma whether to continue with labor or not. But if you're able to understand the physiology of the normal labor process, physiology of what is happening in that particular patient in our CTG, to a great extent, we have been able to give vaginal deliveries or prolong the labor even without recourse to scalp pH testing. So I think it's important to understand the pathophysiology behind the trace, which is more important.
What about intrauterine pressure catheter? Is it being used anywhere, madam?
The intrauterine pressure catheter is more an US thingy. I mean, even in UK, we do not follow, we have not used intrauterine pressure catheters. So basically in US, they use it for monitoring the intensity of the contraction, because it is going to give you an accurate Montevideo unit in terms of the actual, amount of pressure within the uterus. They do recommend it in US, and they try to monitor how much of contractions, what is the strength of the contractions, because they say at least 200 Montevideo units should have been, sort of recorded for it to say it is an adequate contraction. But practically, we have not used it in UK. It is more a US kind of, setting wherein they use IUDCs.
So tocodynamic is fair enough for intrauterine pressure.
I don't think it has much place. Actually, it's quite invasive. It might not record properly also. There are lots of drawbacks with this catheter. And whenever you want to augment a lady with oxytocin with a VBAC, when you're giving her a trial of vaginal delivery, with the previous section, then probably there is a place. That was the only indication where we were using when we had to augment her for whatever reason. So, so that was the only place. Otherwise, routinely it doesn't have any place.
Tocodynamic is fair enough for the intrauterine pressure monitor, madam.
No, Toco, unfortunately, doesn't reliably give you the pressure. It gives the frequency of contractions more reliably, but not the pressure. Not the pressure. It's very, I mean, actually there are lots of variables which can affect the, what can I say, the Toco tracings.
Yes.
So I don't think we should rely on Toco for pressure.
Thank you, madam. So is episiotomy indicated routinely?
Not really. Not really. Yeah.
Dr.
Not
Pradeep?
really. Depends on assessment of your obstetric assessment of the perineal body.
Dr. Pradeep, what is your take?
It's right, depending on the parity. I mean, gravity status. I mean, the madam told no assessment of the perineum rigidity and all. You can take a decision.
So routinely it is not advocated.
Routinely it's not indicated.
Prasanna, sir?
Actually, I have worked in a unit which the professor, unit chief was totally against episiotomy for normal labor. I would, the other two units used to criticize, and also the residents used to be very critical of it, because the second stage used to appear, because apparently it appeared to take a long time. And also people would will be itching in their hands to give the episiotomy. So that is one thing, evidence about, but because the UK and the US and all, they said that studies showed a lot of perineal sphincter disorders and other things, perineal floor problems, etc. I actually worked for a whole year in a unit which actively desisted from giving episiotomy. Sir was Dr. Matthews Mathai, to be exact. I can remember him. So, but it was very, very difficult. It is not easy to practice, I'm telling you.
Does it increase chances of perineal tear, sir?
Yeah. I mean, perineal tears weren't that much. Perineal tears used to happen for some other reason, big babies or something like that.
Okay.
But the time, it used to seem to go on for second stage. So that is one of the things, and people used to instinctively go for the episiotomy scissors, and it was very difficult, I must say. But routine episiotomy is not indicated according to most modern obstetrics literature.
Okay. Does squatting during bearing down help in the delivery?
I have no idea.
We don't have much experience with squatting during bearing down. I think you need special training to deliver a lady who is really
don't have the
squatting.
culture of midwife-led units, obstetric units like in the UK.
Yeah. Africa, I think it's very common. Squatting is very common in Africa. But
squatting stools, birthing stools, and separate things which you can use. But as Prasanna sir said, midwives do follow that, but we do not have any great experience personally. We see them squatting, and then when we are called in, immediately put them on the bed because that's where we are more comfortable.
Yeah.
As one WHO manual of labor progress is there, madam. The recent WHO manual of labor progress.
Yes.
They were suggesting squatting increases chances of normal delivery.
Yeah, it could be. It could be so, because upright positions can.
I think we should lead the way. Actually, those of us who are working in teaching institutions should lead the way, conduct a study or do something.
Sure.
There's no other way.
Yeah.
So antenatally, should we give advise squatting exercises?
Again, is part of your earlier question. So we are unable to answer this adequate, satisfactorily.
Yeah, squatting exercises are important because it pushes the head into the pelvis. Okay, so that is what we have found with some yogic postures also. It pushes the head into the pelvis. So same thing with squatting also. It's likely to do, because it's going to alter the pelvic dimensions and allow the head to get in.
The second stage of labor is prolonged. So when do you think that we should go for instrumental delivery, sir?
Is that for me?
Yeah, Prasanna, sir.
Okay. I think standard indications for instrumental delivery should apply. I mean, if you find there is fetal distress and second stage is really prolonged, I would stick with the standard indications.
Okay, so there is nothing like, even if the second stage is just gets prolonged, like 1 hour, 2 hours, up to 2 hours, we can wait in second stage of labor.
Active second stage.
2 hours of pushing.
2 hours
pushing.
of active pushing. Okay.
In an hour in from multiple, but it should not be, indication should not be obstetrician's exhaustion.
Yes.
That is the only thing. I think we have to sort of keep our hands out and also our body out of the labor room, So it is very tempting to sort of do something if we are in the labor ward to expedite delivery, but I think we should just keep away from the labor ward unless it's very much required or the lady is about to deliver. We shouldn't.
Okay. What is the preferred instrumental delivery, madam? Whether ventouse or forceps, which is preferred?
Depends on how one is what one is comfortable with, but it depends on the position, and also if it needs rotation, and if you are unable to manually rotate it, obviously ventouse or Keelan's if you are if you can manage, but ventouse if it is a rotational delivery that you are wanting to do. If the caput is very large, then you don't want to really use ventouse because the chance of failure is high. If you are unable to decipher the position properly, but if you think that you definitely can achieve a vaginal delivery, probably ventouse would be safer. Forceps, you need proper determination of the position of the fetal head. That's very, very important. So it depends on what you're comfortable with and on the individual situation.
Depends upon the indication. Say, for example, if it's a prolonged second stage, and as ma'am was saying, there is excessive cap push, and she's got a dense epidural, she's not actively pushing, maternal pushing is not very adequate, then you might have to go and do a forceps, because if you're going to do a ventouse in such conditions, you are more likely to fail and end up with a sequential instrument. Whereas if it's a straightforward fetal distress, the head is descending very well, mother is pushing well, she doesn't have a dense epidural, then maybe it would be easier with the ventouse. So I think it depends upon, as ma'am said, the individual case scenario, and of course the experience and the comfort of the operator to some extent.
And also availability of proper equipments.
Okay, madam. Like how many?
Sometimes all of a sudden you find that the ventouse machine is not working properly and things like that.
Go for forceps. How many pulls is allowed in a to call it as a fail?
Fail. If it is not this, usually traditionally it says 3 pulls, but if it is just not descending with even 1 good pull, I would be very worried. Okay.
I think it is a
So,
continuous assessment of the design.
Yeah.
If you have
And
applied the
we have to reassess.
twice, and you don't do it again. So it's as simple as that. And it should be out.
Okay.
So that is a standard, number of attempts which are mentioned in most literature.
Dr. Pradeep, what is your take?
Absolutely sure all the criteria for the particular instrument is met. Otherwise, you should be worried even much before you assemble your instruments.
Okay.
Yeah, my attitude is little reluctance toward operative delivery once I landed in Bangalore, because I know that irrespective of your expertise, there is definitely some complications are there compared to the non-operative delivery. So 100% you should look into the indication. If it is a really indication is there, fulfilling all the criteria, try for one whichever you have expertise. Otherwise, I feel at my level, at my personal level, little reluctance about going for operative vaginal delivery. As a teacher.
So should we do nasal suctioning after the delivery of the head in all the cases?
No.
No.
Let the baby sneeze.
Nasal sectioning is not recommended because you would rather cause more trauma and more problems. So unless there is an actual obstruction, you don't need to be suctioning.
No need to do
nasal or oral, both. Actually, if you are touching the posterior wall of the pharynx, it can cause apnea, bradycardia.
Okay, so this patient delivered a male baby at 3.7 kg with the right middle lateral epidural.
Wow, very nice.
20 minutes after the full delivery.
Congratulations. Good, great.
So now early or delayed cord clamping, what do you prefer, madam?
Delayed cord clamping?
Delayed cord clamping, unless there is a maternal or fetal urgency or worry that you'll have to clamp it. Otherwise, you go for delayed cord clamping, especially in term vigorous babies.
Absolutely. And also, one word again of caution. Many people are opting for cord blood banking. So we should not clamp it early for the sake of cord blood banking, because we will be jeopardizing the fetus, the baby, of at least 50 ml of blood, autologous blood transfusion, So I don't think we should be, doing that. Worrying about collecting the cord blood and clamping it early. you can clamp, delayed card clamping, and then you can collect. But not the
Sometimes
other
the
way around.
pulsation lasts even more than 6 minutes. So what to do in that case, madam?
So usually the recommendation
minute.
is 1 to 2 minutes.
Only 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes. That's all.
1
You don't
minute.
matter.
So how long we can wait for the signs of placental separation after the delivery of the baby?
I mean, I would say probably if there is not much of bleeding, 30 minutes.
It depends upon whether you have done active management or passive management. I don't think we do passive management here, but generally you can used to give passive management. So then, after 30 minutes, you would then move them on to active management. But if you've already done active management, as ma'am said, 30 minutes. Provided mother is stable, she's not bleeding, and observations are satisfactory.
Suppose if it is delayed, so should we go for intraumbilical oxytocin injection? Is it helpful?
I mean,
Well,
we
it is debatable.
routinely do it if there is any, sort of delay in the separation of the placenta. We used to do 10 units of oxytocin and 10 ml of normal saline injected with proximal clamping. It did help us, but studies have not shown a great benefit in them preventing any problems.
Yeah, somehow I haven't found much benefit here.
So some people even letting down the cord blood to pass itself means without putting the clamp to the maternal side. That also they practice, and they're according to the senior gynecologist, some are telling it is beneficial in the placental separation and in the reduction of blood loss.
In fact, when you have collected the cord blood for cord blood banking, most of the time the placenta separates out quite well and within a short interval. I have hardly come across any manual removal of placenta or anything like that when we have collected cord blood sample for cord blood banking.
Thank you. So in PPH following a normal delivery, so when do you decide that this medical management is enough, we should go for surgical management?
Very difficult decision, actually. I think it's very important to make sure that you have done used all the medications to the maximum, and also you have tried tamponade, you have corrected her DIC if she is going into DIC. In spite of all this, if it is still not coming under control, then probably you will have to go for surgical management, particularly to exclude trauma. An examination under anesthesia is very important. And then we'll have to decide whether it is just, if we are able to sort of take care of all these, if we have medically managed her well, if we have corrected the DIC component, if we have tried tamponade, decision to go for surgical management very rarely arises.
Means should we not waste significant amount of time in the medical management?
No.
Even surgical management also should not fail.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Golden hour should not be lost.
Most of the studies have been told that there is a blood loss is more after misoprostol 50 microgram. And incidence of, we have, I think in the Bangalore Medical College, the first study what we have done in Bowring Hospital in 2000 with the 50 microgram, that has been clearly indicated that the blood loss is more and the vaginal tests, cervical-vaginal tests are relatively more compared to the other methods of induction. So in this scenario, you have to be mentally, you have to be ready. You have to be ready with because your response should be fast. So I think putting a time limit is not a right idea. I think you have to assess individually and you have to respond.
No, it is not about a time limit. What and all should have been done to tell that now it is enough, we should go for surgery?
See, you have exhausted all your medical treatment and you have tried to correct the DIC. In spite of that, she has gone into a vicious cycle where you want to remove the uterus. That is the indication.
It is not stable in spite of exhausting
and
all
also,
the
you want to exclude trauma. So many times there can be atony plus trauma. trauma can be missed. I have come across that quite a few times. So we have to keep trauma in mind and then examine them under anesthesia. And then probably if you have gone into a vicious cycle, if there is no trauma, if you're still in the vicious cycle, you have caught in the whirlpool, then you have to take it as the last resort, but not a late resort.
Earlier the better, yeah.
No, one thing, it's an unofficial statement. In this era of a strong uterotonics in our hand, the most of the time, unless ruled out, it is a traumatic rather than atonic, because we have so many drugs in our hand. So the response also will be little earlier, taking into consideration. That's what my feeling.
Thank you for that. So with this, we'll take up the next case. That is pre-labor rupture of membrane, which popularly call it as premature rupture of membrane. So she was a primigravida, 39 weeks, 2 days gestation. She came with history of PV leaking since 1 hour. She was pursuing the fetal movements well. There was no history of pain or PV bleeding. For abdomen examination showed left occipital lateral position. First speculum leaking was present. It was clear liquor. And PV examination showed Bishop score of 6. Now she's a primigravida, 39 weeks, 2 days, cephalic presentation with pre-labor rupture of membrane. Her ultrasonography showed single life intrauterine pregnancy of 38 to 39 weeks gestation. Estimated fetal weight 3.2 kg and AFI was 8. NST is reactive. So should we wait for spontaneous onset of labor or should we induce us right away? What is your opinion, madam?
See, basically, both of them are fine. Conservative, expected management, or active labor. I mean, in fact, I know the term prompt trial which was done, which showed if you're going to be waiting, there is a slightly increased risk of infection. That is what we are worried about. But if you look at various guidelines, they say we can give them a short period. But unfortunately, none of them have come up with a clear recommendation as to how short is short or how long is too long. But in our unit, we tend to give them 12 to 24 hours because many of them do go into spontaneous labor by then. Provided the maternal and the fetal conditions are satisfactory, it is important that we closely monitor them because we need to be careful that they do not get into infection. But if everything is satisfactory, we can give them a short period of expectant management.
Short means how short, madam?
That is question because none of them come with a clear recommendation. But generally 12, some have said 12, but up to 24 hours, we are pretty all right. Beyond that, I think we would be a bit worried.
Prasanna, sir?
Yeah, now the spontaneous, earlier we used to really give a time limit of 24 hours, but many studies, I mean, including the initial studies, they gave options like you can directly straight away induction with oxytocin would also, there were many studies. Like early induction is better in case of rupture of membranes. And maximum you can wait is 24 hours.
Yes, madam.
I have a different method. I always tell, when she comes to go for a Leica assessment, again, if the Leica is quite good, irrespective of leaking, my waiting period, it increases. If Leica is already borderline or coming less than 5, my waiting period decreases, irrespective of infection risk. That I will take into the account, the Leica volume.
Yes, madam, Lata madam, what is your opinion, madam?
Usually we tend to wait. We definitely restrict the number of vaginal examinations. We actually don't even assess them actually when they come with ruptured membranes. If CTG is all right, etc., we just confirm with a per speculum examination whether it's a true rupture of membranes or not, and then we avoid digital examination of the cervix. So to reduce the chance of infection, we leave them alone usually for 12 to 24 hours. I mean, without, just before the induction process, we examine them and then decide on the method of induction.
Okay, it means 12 to 24 hours wait is good.
Yeah, we do wait.
What happens is usually people, sorry. In practice, what happens is people do wait for 6 to 8 hours and then start induction. It is only the mothers mothers or relatives who would be anxious that their labor should be expedited. So
proper counseling of the woman and her relatives is very important. They think once the liquor has drained, the baby is going to get distressed. It is not, I mean, we have to say that it is not fish out of water. It's not like fish out of water, you know. So we have to explain to them and ask them to wait. Many of them set into labor by 12 to 24 hours. And
but usually
I think
they'll go to other
80%
doctors
of
and
them
discuss
set
and
it.
come, madam. Like,
That's the problem. I mean, all of us should be talking evidence-based medicine. It's not just the experience-based medicine, but experience is important, there's no doubt. But we can say, look, evidence says this, probably she is trying to do that for you, and there's nothing wrong. Okay, if you have trusted her to be with her for so many, or with him or with her for so many months, I think you should respect. That should be the colleagues' what can I say, reassuring words.
okay, thank you.
And professionalism.
So should we use prophylactic antibiotic in a pre-labor rupture of membrane, madam?
There is no evidence, but unfortunately we do use, because like you said,
yes, madam,
that you felt that the infection rates were higher if we did not use, if you did not use antibiotics with induction. Similarly, we felt that with pre-labor rupture of membranes, we started using antibiotics because I felt that the rate of infection was more.
What is
institutions practice what they preach actually. Many hospital infection committees ask our opinion, like whether do the protocols, but practice after few months it will be back to again
square one.
And prophylactic antibiotic is given. I do agree with that. Yeah.
That is what pediatric counterpart usually questions how many hours of leaking. They take their own decision about the starting antibiotic to the neonate according to the hours of leaking. They don't ask us, have you started antibiotic or not? They will take according to them. That is happening.
As madam rightly suggested, you should have a perinatal meeting. So we should discuss with both the department and then take a decision.
They may be taking according to their guidelines. They are not taking individually.
That's what.
It's according to the IAP, they have recommended. According to the duration of leaking, you have to take a decision. That may be they may be following. It's not an individual hospital policy.
We should have hospital audits and discuss it with neonatal colleagues, and then come to a decision.
Okay. So what is the antibiotic preferred, madam? What is the antibiotic routinely preferred?
We usually use cephalosporins.
Cephalosporins. Sir? Or
second generation cephalosporins.
We give cefotaxime or ceftriaxone.
Oral.
Okay. Srimati, madam?
Yeah, we use oral antibiotics. We use Taxim and cefotaxime. So we don't want a very broad spectrum, but at the same time, we need something which should have a fairly, sort of good effect on the microorganisms which you're planning to target. And again, I think here again, institutional protocols are important because you need to look at what your particular, hospital is growing, and based upon that, you might have to tailor the antibiotics.
Thank you. So if mechanism and Laker is seen, is it an indication for abdominal delivery?
There is an indication for induction, but not for abdominal delivery.
Induction or augmentation, whatever you want to call.
In meconium stent, sometimes they say you don't even have to augment them. We can even wait because it's almost, as good as clear Laker. But we tend to be a bit worried if we see meconium. It is definitely, probably an indication for direct augmentation rather than an expectant management, but not for abdominal delivery.
Dr. Prakruti?
Yes, sir.
In these conditions, can antenatal monitoring will help?
Yeah, we have to keep them on a continuous monitor. If they come in latent labor, inducing with oxytocin would be better choice compared to misoprostol, because to have a controlled contractions, and continuous monitoring is important because to detect any aspiration is less chance, but we have to be careful.
So after 8 hours, she went in labor. So what is the preferred method of induction of labor, or maybe augmentation of labor in this patient? Like after 8 hours, she started having slow uterine contractions, but that was not enough to go in labor. Should we, what is the preferred method of augmentation of labor or induction of labor in this case?
It depends upon the vaginal assessment.
Assessment.
If you think she is favorable, then you might be able to just do syntocinon. So, because it said station -1, what about the cervical dilatation, effacement? It depends upon all those.
Yeah, Bishop score is around 6 only, madam. In this patient also, it was around 6.
So we can then still give misoprostol, PGE1, PGE2, all of them are fine. Only, worry is that if you're going to do mechanical dilatation, I would probably not be very comfortable with the ruptured membranes. But otherwise, prostaglandins can be safely given. Vaginal, I would again be a bit careful because it may not work properly. It can get washed out, and the amount of absorption can be very variable. So we tend to give them oral misoprostol. But again, vaginal prostaglandins can still be safely given.
Mostly, sometime 4 to 6 hours, oxytocin quite works.